Hi, my name is Adrian, and welcome to the Consulting Academy. You are watching our Introduction to the Case Interview series, and this is Understanding the Criteria. Before we start, let me talk a little bit about why we should understand the criteria of a case interview. Based on our experience, this is how most of our students prepare for the case interview. They start by reading a lot of material and theory on how to ace the case interview. They read up on frameworks, they read up on approaches, and then finally, when they're comfortable enough, they will find a case buddy to practice with. Upon practicing with the case buddies, they receive a little bit of feedback on how they could do better. Maybe they could approach the problem a little bit better, or maybe they could use a different framework. However, the problem with this approach is that people tend to miss a little bit of pieces here and there, and we're not really looking at it from the angle of the consulting firms. What consulting firms care about is a very specific set of variables and whether the candidate matches those boxes. So what we've done here is we've assembled a team of ex-consultants and ex-recruiters at consulting firms, and we've come up with an interview criteria of what typically gets looked at when you're applying to McKinsey, Bain, and BCG. Now, keep in mind, each of these firms have their own unique criteria, but when we're talking about case interview preparation, we want to make sure that our candidates are ready for all three firms. And the best way to do this is to have a compiled criteria where you look at all the dimensions and the ones that make the most sense. And this is what we're going to do here today. So without further ado, let me jump into the criteria. So what you can see here is a high-level summary of the case interview criteria. And as you can see, there are three key dimensions that consulting firms tend to look at: problem solving and insight, practicality and effectiveness, communication and presence. And let me go into a little bit of detail of how you can ace these three dimensions. First of all, problem solving and insight. This has got to do with your ability to solve the issues that you're given. And as you can see here, typically there are two aspects that they analyze: the qualitative aspect and the quantitative aspect. So both of these parts are really important here. The qualitative aspect is usually focused on your business sense and knowledge, whereas the quantitative part is about how comfortable you are with numbers. Not just about how effective your calculations are, but how you make sense of the numbers and derive insights from them. Now, these two parts often come hand in hand. In order to do solid qualitative analysis, you need to interpret the numbers in the right way to arrive to the right conclusions. And vice versa, in order to do solid quantitative analysis, you need to ask the right questions in order to get the numbers that you need. Now, based on our experience, business students tend to do quite well in the problem solving and insight department, whereas people who are a bit newer to the business world, such as engineering students, may struggle a little bit more over here. And a good way for you to train your problem solving and insight is, number one, by reading some of the existing material that is available online, including on our website, or number two, just practicing more and getting a better sense of how consultants approach problems. Now, the second part that we're going to look at is practicality and effectiveness. And this is where most people struggle with the case interview. So there are two sub-dimensions here, but we're going to go into quite a lot of detail here. So number one is structure and approach. Now, you're probably familiar with these two words. You've probably heard it a lot when you read Victor Ching, perhaps, when people talk about frameworks and people talk about having a right structure in the beginning. This is essentially what it is. However, it's important to note that it's not just about how you perform in the beginning, but also about how your structure evolves as you try to solve the case. And here, it's not just about having a structure where you ask a million questions, but it's about having a good structure where you focus on the right type of question and you don't beat around the bush until you get to the answer. Now, the second part here, sanity checks, is often a part that people forget to consider when they're preparing for the case interview. And this part is really a little bit trickier to prepare, particularly for people who haven't had any job experience yet. What this means is During the case interview, you're often thrown a lot of hypothetical examples. You're given a fake company, a fake client, a fake situation. However, these situations are and stories are built based on real life projects and real life experiences. So therefore, it's important that you try to think about the situation from a real life perspective. If a number seems too high or too low, then you might want to voice it out. Or if you're not sure if your calculations are right, then you might want to ask yourself, directionally, does this number make sense? And this is what we mean here by sanity checks. Many candidates don't end up performing too well because they don't do their sanity checks. Last but not least, we have communication and presence. Now, this part here may seem a little bit similar to practicality and effectiveness, but in essence, they're testing how well you communicate and how well you handle your own presence. And there are two parts that we want our candidates to focus on. First part is synthesis, which is how well you combine your insights and give a summary of it. And this is not a very easy thing to do on the spot. However, this is definitely something you have to train for when you're doing a case interview. The reason why is because as a consultant, you're often forced to deal with unexpected situations where you have to give people an executive summary of the insights that you have derived. And this is a really tricky skill if you consider the big picture. Many consultants spend months building an Excel model or working on a specific deliverable just to have minutes to present it. And this is essentially the skill that they're trying to test in the case interview, whether you're able to communicate the most important insights when you're given a load of information. Now, the second part here is a little bit more abstract, but it's equally as important, which is collaboration. If you've done a real case interview before, you might have noticed that it's not exactly like an exam where you're just trying to solve the problem alone. Instead, you have many different interactions with the interviewer. And this is the case for both the interviewer-led style, such as McKinsey, and the interviewee-led style, such as BCG. Now, what you have to do here to get a decent score for collaboration is to simply interact with your interviewer. Don't treat him as a computer that's giving you data and answer. Treat him as a thought partner. I'm not asking you to ask the interviewer for guidance or for hints, but what you can do is when you come up with your own structure or you come up with your own ideas, validate them with the interviewer. Talk to him or her and see if your approach makes sense to them. This is often what you're expected to do as a consultant. You're rarely expected to work alone in a project team. Instead, you have to come up with your own approach and validate it with your manager or project leader. And this is exactly what they're trying to test for. They're trying to see if you are a potential employee that could collaborate nicely with them. So these three dimensions are essentially what you need to focus on to do well in the case interview. And again, I'd like to reiterate that this criteria has been built based on our real life experiences being on the other side, being the interviewer for MBB. So if you want to do well, then definitely use this as a starting point. And I encourage you to use this when you're practicing with your case buddies as well. So you can have a little bit more concrete comments and specific action items that you could work on to boost these scores. Now, there is one additional thing at the bottom here that's a little bit more abstract. And this is the question of whether the interviewer would put you as a candidate in front of a client alone. While you only see one line here, this is actually a make or break question. Unlike the other criteria where you have a little bit of room for error, this question essentially decides whether you'll make it through the round of the interview or not. And clearly the answer here has to be a yes. This yes or no question is determined based on how you perform for the other dimensions. Quite often or not, if you score well in the other dimensions, you will get a yes here. And vice versa, if you don't, you'll get a no here. And of course, there are a few factors that really determine on the interviewer him or herself. For example, if they think that you're not approachable enough as a person, even if you get all high scores in the other dimensions, you still might get a no in this one. So for this reason, it's important to keep in mind that while you could be casual and conversational with an interview, you still need to show them that you are client friendly and you can handle challenging problems on your own. So the next logical question for you is probably, how do I do better in each of these dimensions? And unfortunately, it's going to be a little tricky for us to cover all of that in one single video. Instead, what I recommend for you if you want to do better is to watch the rest of our Introduction to the Case Interview series. In our series, we will structure our lessons based on these dimensions and how you could do better specifically on each of these items. But before you binge watch all of these videos, what I suggest you to do is to instead do one or two practice case interviews and see how you rank first in each of these dimensions. And the best way to do it, of course, is to do it with people who are more experienced because they are more familiar with these criteria and they can tell you what exactly to work on. If you are in need of help, we, the Consulting Academy, can offer one-on-one coaching sessions with experienced coaches. And this is a very effective way for you to kickstart your case interview practice. With the diagnostic test, you will receive your very own results of the case interview criteria, along with concrete comments on what you could work on. Additionally, we will also help you formulate a plan on how you can work on these specific dimensions and subdimensions. And we will provide tailor-made cases for you to specifically work on those dimensions. That way, you could follow our plan and not waste any time on the dimensions that you are already doing well on. So again, if you want to hear more about these specific dimensions, then please subscribe to our Introduction to Case Interview series. Thanks for watching. My name is Adrian, and I will see you next time.